And greetings. Happy Wednesday. Welcome to the Steve Deace Show here, live and on demand on BlazeTV radio and podcast, alongside Todd Erzin and Aaron McIntyre. Seems weird having you back over there again, brother. I am Steve Deace, brought to you by our friends over at First Cup Coffee Company, the Christian-owned Patriot Coffee Company that stands for core values like faith, family, and freedom, just like you. But that's not why you want to buy their product. That wouldn't be good enough for this show. They've got to actually do a good product, right? I mean, the Lord gave you a talent. Go out. He wants you to multiply it. They do that at the Patriot-owned coffee company known as First Cup Coffee Company. With a flavor for every freedom-loving American, you can get 10% off right now using my last name, Deace, as your promo code at firstcup.com. And they put the roast date right there, by the way, on every bag. So you're going to see it was shipped to you within days of roasting. All right. So you don't want to beat it. You can't beat it. And you don't want to miss out, because if you subscribe, you'll get an additional 10% off for the life of the subscription as well. Take advantage of this. Firstcup.com, promo code Deace. That's firstcup.com. Use the promo code Deace. All right, coming up on the show today. Real quick, let me mention this too. Our colleague, Jason Whitlock here at The Blaze, is doing another Fearless Army roll call. It's now become an annual roll call event, an all-day men's summit in Nashville that invites believers to fellowship together across our various differences, that most of which happen to be superficial, and get together on the mindset and strategies that allow us to conquer the demonic forces tearing apart the country. He is partnering with country music star John Rich for this event, presented by our good friends at Preborn. You don't want to miss it. This is where godly men must come together and encourage each other towards love and good deeds, like it says in Hebrews. Go to fearlessarmyrollcall.com to reserve your spot. That's fearlessarmyrollcall.com. Again, head over to fearlessarmyrollcall.com. All right, you guys know the drill on a Wednesday. It'll be time for buy, sell, or hold. And then next hour, of course, we'll be joined by our friend and colleague. You know him and you love him as the prophet of woe and lamentation, Daniel Horowitz. But let's begin, as we always do, with Aaron's rundown of what happened while we were away.
What happened while we were away, brought to you by Super Happy Fun Times with the most Catholic president in history. 4 more pro-life Christians were convicted on Tuesday of Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances Act violations after they were charged by the Biden administration over a peaceful protest at a Tennessee baby-killing facility. The 4 found guilty are Eva Idle, Eva Zastro, James Zastro, and Paul Place. They face a year in prison and thousands of dollars in fines upon sentencing. They're currently set to be sentenced on July 30th. Former ESPN host Sage Steele has revealed that her 2021 interview with President Biden was scripted by network executives. In an interview with Fox News Digital, Steele recalled the quote-unquote structured nature of the pre-taped interview, so much so that her ESPN bosses handed her a script to go off of. Steele says she didn't know for certain whether ESPN sent the questions to the White House in advance of the interview, but seemed confident that that is indeed what happened. ESPN declined to comment. International news: Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is apologizing after a stray IDF airstrike hit a humanitarian food vehicle in Gaza, killing 7 people. Netanyahu pledged a full investigation into how this happened and expressed remorse over the international team of aid workers who were killed. A 7.4 magnitude earthquake, followed by several strong aftershocks, struck off the east coast of Taiwan on Wednesday morning, killing at least 9 people and injuring at least 963, according to Taiwan's fire department. The earthquake, which damaged buildings and caused landslides, was the largest to hit Taiwan in 25 years and was also felt in parts of China. Back at home, in the Wisconsin primary yesterday, one of many primaries across the country, a lot of people have noted that the GOP flipped a mayoral seat in Wausau, an area that voted +8 for Joe Biden. That's true, and that can be encouraging. But on the other hand, in the Wisconsin primary yesterday, over 30,000 more people voted for Joe Biden in the uncontested Democrat primary than who voted for Donald Trump in the uncontested GOP primary. So there's that, too. The nation's largest fresh egg producer has shut down one of its Texas-based plants. Cal Maine Foods Incorporated said in a statement that approximately 1.6 million laying hens and 337,000 pullets, about 3.6% of its total flock, were destroyed after an outbreak of avian influenza was found at the facility in Palmer County, Texas. Meanwhile, in Florida, more thoughts from Governor Ron DeSantis about the state's shiny new anti-squatters law.
In some of these states, the property owner is the one that actually gets arrested when there's a confrontation. That's absurd. you don't have a right to squat in somebody's property. And so if you try to squat in the state of Florida, the homeowner has a very quick remedy. You call the sheriff, and you guys will have a sheriff soon here in this county. You call the sheriff, they send people, and they evict the squatters from your residence. That's the way it should be. That's how private property rights work.
And finally, UConn women's basketball superstar Paige Buchers suffered a torn ACL last season, which kept her out for basically the entire season. This year, she was back, but the rest of her team has been plagued by injuries. She is back, though, and she's got them in the women's Final Four. After beating USC the other night in the Elite Eight, Buchers discussed what truly motivates her on and off the floor.
So much gratitude. I'm a living testimony. I give all glory to God. He works in mysterious ways. Last year I was praying to be back at this stage, and he sent me trials and tribulations. But it was to build my character. It was to test my faith to see if I was only believer in the good times. Let's go! But I just kept on believing. I did all I could so God can do all I can't, and just so much joy and pride for this team. I'm so proud. We're not even supposed to be here, and here we are, a godly miracle.
And that's what happened while we were away.
You know what, man? Thank you for putting that in. And let's try to be intentional any more times we see stuff like that.
Listen, I'm not looking for the most polished I'm sorry. I'm not looking for the most polished apologetic. I think it's good when that's injected into the mainstream.
Yeah,
that's all.
Just some earnest, sincere expression of faith, humility, gratitude, joy.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. When we get people with on major platforms that take advantage of it to do stuff like that, let's take advantage of that and make sure we include them like you just did there. So thank you for doing that. Aaron's Montage, I just mentioned them. Brought to you by our friends over at Preborn. I mentioned they are helping to present our colleague Jason Whitlock's roll call event in Nashville later this spring. We partner with them all over the Blaze because we agree with them that abortion has been the greatest sin in our history as a country, and it still happens every single day. And unfortunately, overturning Roe versus Wade was only the first step in a long list of steps toward eventually cleansing our country of that horrific stain on the conscience. And so the ministry of Preborn, they empower young expectant mothers in crisis to choose life. They've rescued hundreds of thousands of babies' lives through ultrasound. You guys have partnered with them to help rescue tens of thousands of babies. So thank you for each and every one of them. Because when a woman considering abortion visits one of their centers, she gets to hear her baby's heartbeat. She meets that precious child on an ultrasound. It's a divine encounter. And the majority of the time, she's going to choose life for her baby. All right, so Preborn has a passion to save unborn babies from being murdered and see women come to Christ. Over the last 15 years, they've counseled over 450,000 women considering abortion. Over 200,000 babies have been saved. Those are amazing numbers, but we can do even more with your help. If you want to donate tax deductible, you can do it right now by dialing pound 250, say the keyword baby on your mobile phone, or do what we do. Go to preborn.com/Steve. Again, that's preborn.com/Steve. All right, let's discuss what's in your montage, Aaron. And I'm going to put you guys on the spot, okay? We've talked the last few years about how Governor DeSantis in Florida has reintroduced the country to what the founders would have called the doctrine of the lesser magistrate or interposition, right? This is why we have branches of government. This is why we have levels of government. Bureaucracy is not always a dirty word. Okay. The point being that there would be multiple outlets should human nature, craven basic instinct, get a hold of any particular branch. You'd have other places to go to seek relief, so that the people could remain sovereign. Right down to the jury box, which the founders considered to be the unofficial fourth branch of government, your local jury of your own peers. So, I mean, there's no more direct threat to your God-given rights than when the government assigned to protect them targets you directly to not just take them away, but punish you for using them, right? That's the most direct assault on your God-given rights possible, okay? And it doesn't always require, tanks in a square. Sometimes it's called the FACE Act. But the essence of both are basically the same, right? That you are going to be sought after and then targeted and then punished because you used your God-given rights. So we're going to go, as a government, we're going to go from defending them to not defending them. You're on your own, kid. To now, we're going to go after you for using them. And with items like the FACE Act, that's basically where the federal government, particularly under this regime, is currently at. Are we all tracking on this so far?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So the last few years, we saw Ron DeSantis do something that was very common in previous eras, particularly before the progressives took over the law schools of America. We would see state legislatures. We would see... this is why senators were elected by state legislatures originally as a means of doing this. We would see states assert their post-9th Amendment sovereignty all of the time. Yeah, okay, cool, we're not doing that. Or you can't fund that, so that's great. That's not what we believe down here, so more power to you. And it was part of the tension between the states and the feds, and that tension is good. That tension's good. Because chances are, if there's harmony, it's probably on the side of tyranny if you look at the long arc of human history, right? When lots of levels of government just unilaterally agree on things, it's almost never for the light. Fair? Mm-hmm. Okay? Almost every time there's lots of levels of government. Guys, we almost couldn't found this country. There were so many stark disagreements between Federalist and Anti-Federalist. Or should we make Washington king? Or should we have a republic? So the tension there, as long as it's a healthy tension and it's not unbridled, is a good thing. It makes things go slowly. Passions can't just uniquely turn things like you feel right now on issues like gender, where it just feels like we started contemplating this silliness like 10 minutes ago, and now it's the full Monty deep throat version of it. And if you don't accept every ounce of DNA, emitted from the source, then you can't be an American, right? Yeah. Okay. How did this happen? Well, that tension I just mentioned that the founders thought was healthy and wanted because they understood it, because they didn't agree with each other on everything either. Right? You had some guys that went home to their slaves. The other guys went home to their abolitionist societies. They didn't agree on everything either. So they wanted that tension on purpose, so that we wouldn't see wide swings like you're seeing right now, like on the tranny issue. Something new, radical is presented that appears to be an affront to the laws of nature and nature's God, which is basically the organic code of the United States. Let's call it that. You might be onto something. Maybe you figured something out we didn't know previously. Maybe the apple fell on Newton's head and now we discovered gravity. That could be the case, right? But just in case it's not, we're gonna go grind these gears kind of slowly and make you prove your case before we just totally alter society on your whims, which is what we do now, right? We just alter society on whims now, right? And stuff that previous generations would have thought, how is that even in the bad up to on the on deck circle, is now round in third and headed for home. This is why we've lost this. Okay, so during COVID particularly, you saw Ron DeSantis in Florida do a lot of this, both against the Trump administration, particularly with its proxy leader Anthony Fauci, and then even more aggressively when Fauci got even more aggressive and the vaccine data proved to be bad and everything else we saw the first couple of years of the Biden administration during COVID. He was literally, what does interposition mean? It means he was taking his power that the people of Florida gave to him. He took that power and placed him in his office between the federal government and them to try to either outright protect them, shield them, or at least soften the blow of what the federal government was trying to do against the freedoms of the people of Florida. And as a result, he won the largest landslide in the state of Florida's gubernatorial history. Okay? If we're going to be in an era now And just again, to make the point I just made a second ago and to drive it home once more, because I think we have to accept this if we're going to workshop the problem I'm going to present in a minute. Like I've said before about why I back a convention of states. When we first started doing interviews about this, right around the time you first came on is when we first started entertaining this issue, Todd, right? And you and I were both kind of, skeptical because, I know you go in there with an agenda, but let's face it, we're up against people that don't care what's on your agenda. So, let's make sure we're not a solution in search of a problem here.
Yeah,
right?
How about we just start enforcing the laws we already have on the books kind of thing?
Correct. Yeah. Listen, we were like, we're behind, in the game. We need a major comeback, but it's still just the third quarter. No one, if your team started throwing Hail Mary passes in the third quarter, or even with 10 minutes left in the fourth quarter, you'd be looking at each other like, fire that coach right now, right? Okay. Then some things started happening in the culture over the next few years, right? Yeah. And we started seeing that healthy tension that's supposed to be there is not there anymore. The cartilage is gone from the knee. It's just bone on bone now, right? And so now we're open to it. And now I'm just like a flat out advocate for it. I've spoken on behalf of it all over the country. Why? Well, I think we're at the end of the game when you start throwing Hail Mary passes. And you can continue to run your conventional offense. But understand, you're way behind. There's not enough time conventionally to score as many points. You're not down by one score here. You're down by a few. So there's not time or maybe you're down by one score, but it's got to be a touchdown, and you're like at the 30-yard line, and the clock is ticking. You don't have time, Hinkstram, to matriculate the ball down the field. It's one of those two, right? Mm-hmm. And so, you go ahead. You stick to your conventional offense. That's great. Okay, when the clock strikes 0, they're going to have more points, and the game's going to be over, and they've won it. And you can't replay that game. It's done. It's in the books. It's recorded. When you see a score and the game is over, they call it final. Final. This will be final. So that's great. You didn't take the risk and throw the Hail Mary pass. You just held on to the ball, ran out the clock for the enemy, and they appreciate that and took the W, and the score is now final. That's why you throw the Hail Mary pass, right? And we think we're at that position now that we need to start thinking about Hail Mary passes. So if that is accurate, and I think the story out of Tennessee indicates that it is. I mean, this is not just any state here. Tennessee might be the Christian conservative California, meaning the amount of wealth, ingenuity, talent with our worldview that is assembled there. Could it be more than any particular state in the union, perhaps? Is that fair? It's certainly up there.
Yeah,
okay.
Seems so.
All right. And I mean, this is a place I've gone to and spoken in that state several times. I've gotten to know some of the people there fairly well. It's one of the few states. I mean, I spoke with it on behalf of a group called Tennessee Stands just back in February. It's one of the few states that actually has an active group that's well organized, hitting the Republican Party from the right. This is not, some moderate state. This is not a state that, doesn't have that just kind of became red, because it hated Hillary or something, but doesn't have like some deep entrenched roots in our value system. I mean, this is a state whose demographics line up with very much what we think. Even with, the Country Music Hall of Fame is actually more woke than the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, which I saw for myself last year because I visited both of them. So we're in a position now where the federal government is going to take citizens of Tennessee and it's going to put them in prison, if it can, for using their God-given rights. So the feds have gone from, we will protect your God-given rights, that's the job, right? To, we won't, you're on your own. To now, we're going to target you and persecute you via prosecution if you use them.
Yeah.
Right?
If government does not punish evil, it must punish good.
That's right, because it's going to punish something. Otherwise, why is it there? Exactly. So then, are we in a position? Now, this is not something that should be entertained lightly, cavalierly. Similar to what I just said about Convention of States. Is it something to be you entertain the Convention of States, an Article 5 convention, because the Constitution is basically a dead letter. That's why the founders put it in the Where does the Convention of States, Article 5, Article 5 of what? Where's it at? It's in the Constitution. The founders put it in there for this moment. All right. One more trapdoor, just in case you a-holes really are even dumber than we fear. Okay. We'll give you one more, Hail Mary pass here, which they didn't even have back then. Roger Staubach hadn't invented it yet, but we'll give you one more. Okay. Go for broke, bet it all on black to give yourselves one more chance to save your republic. If you're even dumber than we fear. That's basically what an Article 5 convention is and why the founders put it in there. So really, the debate isn't about whether the Article 5 convention is constitutional. It's actually in the Constitution. I've heard people argue it's not constitutional. It's in the Constitution. But how can something in the Constitution not be constitutional? Todd, do you know? I'm not sure how that works. You're so constitutional that what's in the Constitution is not constitutional to you. So I've heard that argument. Seriously, I've heard that from the right.
I believe it.
I've heard that argument from the right. I have.
I completely believe it.
All right. So then really the argument, therefore, is the time right that this level of a risk is required given what we're up against? That's really the Convention of States debate. Not if it's constitutional, but if the juice is worth the squeeze because of the risk to reward ratio. That's the debate. Fair?
Yep.
What I'm about to propose is a similar debate. Are we at a moment where Bill Lee, the governor of Tennessee, calls out, who's the head of the executive branch? By the way, law enforcement operates under which branch of the government?
Executive.
The executive branch. So they ultimately answer to whom? Him. Are we at a stage where Bill Lee should be asked to call out sheriffs, National Guard, if he's got a state guard like what they have in Texas or Florida, I don't know, okay? But whatever law enforcement is under his purview as the governor, and has them stand a post at the homes of these Tennessee citizens who have done nothing wrong but use their God-given rights. That's all they've done. They didn't just use their God-given right. Prayer is an act of worship, right? It's an act of faith. So they have the God-given right to do this. But they used it to defend the God-given rights of other people, because what's another God-given right? Life. So it's not just that they were using their God-given rights, they were using them to defend the God-given rights of others. Who, by the way, also would have been born where? In Tennessee. Bill Lee took an oath of office to defend the people of Tennessee against all enemies, what?
Foreign and domestic.
Foreign and
domestic.
Foreign and
domestic.
Foreign and
right there in Tennessee at home.
Yeah. Are we at a point now where demand should be made to Bill Lee, call out law enforcement, post them at the homes of these people being persecuted by the federal government immorally, unconstitutionally, unlawfully, and interpose your office on behalf of your citizens? Now understand, this is one of those things that once this latch is broken, it's on. Okay? So you have to understand, if you're asking this, are we at the moment, similar to a convention of states, that the juice is worth the squeeze? The whatever unintended consequences will come of this are worth risking because of the principle at stake. Thoughts?
Of course. We're way past that point.
Yes.
You guys don't even think, you're not even like...
No, let's...
You're not even...
This is the problem, Steve.
Thinking about it.
We were at that point a long time ago, and we should have been. If a nation is truly founded on the things we believe in, we've been ignoring this for far too long. Our founding fathers did this over many things. If our founding fathers would put right here now, would have just been shocked at the usurpations we tolerate in the name of our nonsense and our comfort. The only part about this that you're framing wrongly and mainly intentionally, just to argue the point, is that are we at the point? now.
Because to me, that's the debate.
Any free people does not wait this long to get to this point. Any free people says over my dead body a lot longer, a lot sooner than they do now because they're a free people. They don't tolerate this. And the number of police officers, too. They need to be told to do this because they've got all this back. How many cops have just been doing the brown shirt thing for far too long and arresting moms out on the playground? They need to be told what side they're on. Now, the minute I say any of this, I'm asking Bill Lee to do this. Do we have that manifesto yet? No, so we're probably just screaming into the wind.
Right.
But this should have happened a long time ago. And the fact that it didn't mean everybody needs to look themselves in the eye. You're not a free person. And quite frankly, many of you don't want to be. I'm sorry, Aaron, I interrupted.
No, you're good.
Dear God, wake up.
No, that was wonderful. And let's just be intellectually honest across the board here. I mean, if we're going to ask Bill Lee to do that, why not ask Ron DeSantis or a Kim Reynolds or a Greg Abbott? For anybody persecuted against, nonviolent J6 crimes, should they be doing the same thing as well? I think a lot of people would say yes. And I'm not talking about the stupid, dishonest grifters that we heard during the GOP primary. Ron DeSantis, they were just they're just dishonest people using that as a political cudgel. But we're way past the time. And usually the comeback to this is, well, what happens if, I don't know, California Governor Gavin Newsom just starts rounding up? They're rounding up Christians already. It's basically a version. I've said this before. I'm going to say it again because I think it's funny, but even more than I think it's funny, it's actually true. To come back to what you just said, Steve, and what you just posited and what Todd and I support is, well, be careful what you do now. Be careful the actions you take now because it ain't no fun when the rabbit's got the gun. It ain't no fun when the Satanists actually, have control of the Iowa State House. They might not let you have your nativity display. Ain't no fun when the rabbit's got the gun. Guys, the rabbit has the gun. The rabbit has rabies. He's a communist. He's shouting Karl Marx at you as he points the gun and cocks the chambers the next round, okay? Rabbit's already got the gun. So what are we going to do? We're just going to shout and wave our little pocket constitution at the rabbit, shouting Karl Marx at you? No. So what are you prepared to do is the name of the game. And far too often the answer to that question is nothing. The baseline for Republican governors across this country is...
We're going to vote Republican to save America is what we're going to do, Aaron.
Yeah.
We're going to do that some more. To me, ain't no fun when the rabbit's got the gun applies when there's a social compact.
Applied 30 years ago, you're talking about.
Yeah. So for example... Okay, if I'm living next door to radical rainbow jihad activists, do I on purpose go out of my way to put as many right-wing, symbols in my yard to antagonize them if they're not antagonizing me? That's a legit debate, right? A legit debate.
Yeah.
Because it ain't no fun when the rabbit's got the gun. I mean, do I want to drive down my street and see all their crap in the yard? So if they're leaving me alone, I'll leave them. See what I'm saying? That's when you have that argument. You don't have that argument after your neighbors already put that stuff in their yard.
Yeah.
Once they put that stuff in their yard, then the proper response is to then mount up. Regulators mount up. That's the proper response. All right, now we're having a Christmas light fight over this stuff now. Since you went there, I'm coming off the top rope. But that's the question. Are we at the point then that the social compact is broken? And so these sorts of reverberation, unintended consequences questions are largely just irrelevant now because we're beyond that point.
Correct. And I go back to, I think it was Alex Behrens in a conversation we had with him, I think about ivermectin, and he's on the side of this is not a helpful drug for treating COVID. And basically when we had him on, I was kind of mystified why he was so kind of militantly against that drug as a treatment for COVID. And talking to him on the show, I realized that his main concern wasn't necessarily about the efficacy of the drug. It's basically about the concern of throwing away the institutions that told you, hey, this is maybe not the greatest drug. His concern was mainly institutional. And that's the conversation, that's the debate that's being had on the right. And I keep coming down on the side of we're way past that conversation right now. The institutions right now, if they can't be remade, they can't be saved.
More in a moment. Hey, man, living with pain, it's no fun. Especially when it's the kind that keeps coming back all of the time. Sometimes it feels like nothing's going to make it go away. You can take drugs. Maybe they mask the symptoms for a while. It may also come, though, with some trade-offs you don't want to deal with. Why not try Relief Factor? No guarantee, not saying it's 100%, but Relief Factor is a drug-free supplement created by physicians who can prescribe drugs. And they realized that the reason they had to prescribe so many pain drugs is people were running around with too much inflammation in their joints. And so that's what this supplement wants to attack: the inflammation, the excess inflammation in your joints. That's usually the cause of your chronic pain. Over the years, over 1 million people have tried the 3-week quick start. 70% of them saw such good results in 3 weeks or less if they hung around long term. Why not see what, if you don't see those kinds of results in 3 weeks or less, when you go to relieffactor.com. Take advantage. You want the 3-week quick start, at relieffactor.com. Again, head over to relieffactor.com.
You know, when you started off right there and you said, are you living with pain that you can't get rid of? I just thought we were going right back to what we were talking about. No, it's a commercial for Relief Factor.
You know what? Can we stay with that conversation for just a few more minutes?
We may never stop, though.
Okay.
Because everything is there. Absolutely everything.
I responded to something this morning on X that I think directly applies to this conversation. And I wasn't going to bring it up, except when you and I, Todd, were talking about what we were just discussing during the break, it came up organically. So I thought, you know what, this might be something I think the audience...
spiritual gift.
This might be something I think the audience needs to hear. All right. So I was responding to somebody on X this morning talking about, hey, if you're a conservative, how would you respond to Larry Hogan, the Maryland governor, winning his Senate race this year? Now, Larry Hogan is a rhino's rhino. I mean, he's basically a more polished Chris Christie. He is a but to the left of Christie, actually, on several issues.
He hates the base.
Yeah,
less entertaining.
Yeah. I mean, he is a rhino's rhino. All right. And so I replied, well, he'd be a reliable Democrat vote on a good many things. The first reply I received, and it's like there's nothing changes. We're just still having the same conversations, the same discussions over and over again, while the other side is just doing victory laps. Okay? Well, he's the best we could get in a blue state. And I'm like, we got to take baby steps here. I'm like, I've been hearing this my entire life, my entire career. And good luck to you for trying that. You probably don't have 40 years to learn the lesson the hard way that my generation did, because we did this for the last 40 years. We probably don't have 40 years left. But good luck to you. This is my 18th year doing some form of political activism full-time as a job. Over that span of time, I have done well over 100 debates, appearances, interviews within enemy media, corporate legacy media, from the New York Times and Washington Post to MSNBC and CNN. At the highest levels, I've done it. NPR, done them all. And I did MSNBC. Isn't that what Dave Rubin calls the televised insane asylum? I've done MSNBC more than any of them. Dozens of times. I was a token conservative on MSNBC, either in an interview or on a panel. Dozens of times. Various shows. Primetime shows. And let me tell you what was never once said one time, either before I was on there or when I was on there, because you can hear what's going on the network before you come on, right? It was never said, well, this Democrat's probably the best we could get in a red state. Never once. I've never seen that written anywhere in their media ever. The assumption, they just operate under the assumption that the people they will vote for will represent them. They just operate under this assumption. In the last few years, we've seen a couple of U.S. senators try to be conscientious objectors. Kyrsten Sinema, Joe Manchin. They ran them out for their heterodoxies. Neither one of them is running for re-election. They ran them out. Well, Steve, some of you are going to say, well, Steve, they captured all the institutions and the culture, so they get away with stuff like that. We can't do that. What you don't understand, you're right, by the way, when you say that, that is correct. But what you don't understand is you're indicting your own position. Because you know what? That's what they did while we wasted 40 years voting for a bunch of people that hated our guts. And lying and gaslighting each other that this has to be done every time. They went about the long march to the institutions. You win culture wars from the inside out, not the outside in. That's why we need revival or bust. I mean, in the end, if we don't have a critical mass of saints to push back on the sinners, that's an L. Mm-hmm. You're done, right? That's inside out. Change that happens inside out within human beings, right? Culture wars are won inside out, not outside in. That's why. I mean, you should be able to vote your way out of this. I mean, you can look at the small numbers of people that show up in primaries and think, well, if we just had more of our people show up, we'd win these primaries and better people get elected, right? But see, you don't understand.
Red waves and stuff.
Yeah, you're diagnosing symptoms, not the disease. The symptom is that so few people show up in primaries. It's not the disease. The people are the disease. Just not showing up for primaries, like in Iowa, where 14% showed up for a caucus and what was supposedly the most important election we've ever had. That's a symptom of a disease. The way you win is what people like Chris Rufo are doing. He is fighting inside out, hand-to-hand combat within institutions, literally founding counter-institutions. You go through Chris Rufo's Twitter feed, there's very little about Trump one way or the other, very little about polls one way or the other, very little about electing Republicans or whatever we're all pleasuring each other to with mental masturbation and political pornography. Much of conservative media, unfortunately, is basically we're just giving you OnlyFans content. You get an instant relief, instant release of that built-up tension rather than going out and actually fighting a wife. He's doing the hard work. That's why he's winning. How many people on our side are getting mano-a-mano moments with people like Mark Cuban on social media, daring them to defeat them in an argument, daring them to challenge them? How many? There's a lot of people making more money than Chris Rufo and have a lot bigger platforms than Chris Rufo that aren't getting those kinds of opportunities. Why? Because they're not doing what he's doing. Because they built those platforms and they got that money doing Chuckle Hut crap, feeding you political OnlyFans, low-lying fruit.
The arguments you're talking about are mostly happening within our own movement. Correct. Against each other these days.
Correct. And so what ends up happening here is we are now stuck in a pattern. Listen, if you want to come to me and say to me, listen, man, I think Larry Hogan is a douchebag. He makes Reagan's old 80-20 rule look like the Apostles' Creed. Okay, but aren't you telling me, Steve, we're at the lateness of the hour. We got to do things like throw Hail Mary passes. If I can get 3% out of Larry Hogan, that's 100% more than I'm going to get out of the Democrat. And I'm just trying to slow down as much of this as I can to give people like Chris Rufo time to do their thing. If that's your argument, okay, I get it. I understand it. I might even agree with it, frankly. If I lived in Maryland, I might even agree if I thought about it that way. How often do we make that kind of argument, though? Almost never. I'll answer my own question. Instead, it's not that Larry Hogan is bad. It's that you are, and you have to change what you believe for Larry Hogan. See what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's not that you're the problem. And then nothing's ever demanded out of Larry Hogan. So stop me if this sounds familiar. Vote Republican to save America. Almost no accountability of those Republicans. See, I come from a company before the merger here. I come from a company that was founded by a very wealthy guy who was sick and tired of being lied to by people like John Boehner and taken for a ride with his donor money. So he founded an outlet called Conservative Review in order to hold the party accountable from the right. That was actually my entry point from into this entire thing was through that organization. And that's where Daniel Horowitz came out of that, and our president Gaston Mooney came out of that, and Rob Eno, who's on our overtimes all the time, came out of that. The problem was it was really hard to make money holding the Republican Party accountable from the right. Okay. Now, not as much of a market for that. You guys want the political OnlyFans instead. Show me the porn. Give me the release. Remind me liberals are hypocrites and the brothers be flipping. Give me that. And so we did a generation of vote Republican to save America. Then we can't hold them accountable because if you're holding Republicans accountable, you're helping the Democrats win, don't you know? You're being divisive, don't you know? And then the next cycle, we have to vote Republican to save America. Can't hold them accountable. Otherwise, you're helping the Democrats win. You're being divisive, don't you know? Next cycle, got to vote Republican to save America. Can't hold them accountable. You're being divisive, don't you know? Sooner or later, you do that enough, and you're at the point now that the feds think they can walk right into downtown Nashville, arrest people for praying. And it's considered radical. Fort Sumter. Boston Tea Party to even contemplate maybe the governor of Texas, who's the chief law enforcement officer of the state, shouldn't let his people be falsely imprisoned for not breaking any laws. You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
How did we get here? I'm telling you said to me, Aaron, as we were walking out of here during the break, 10 years ago, if I thought I was going to do this show, I'd have lost my mind 5 years ago. Never in a million years. I'd have thought something's gone horribly wrong. The reasons I opposed Trump in 2016 is I was afraid of these kinds of conversations. Now, why did I oppose Trump in 2024 primary? Because I don't think he'll actually do the reckless stuff that I was afraid of in 2016. Because we saw it in 2020 when we needed the reckless stuff. Anthony Fauci, you got this, man. I'll be over here watching cable news. Go get him. Go get him, son-in-law. Handle it with your bedazzled spark or your scarf there, Deb. I'm like all ready for the radical Trump stuff now, and now it's just like, well, maybe now he's telling Mike Johnson do Lend-Lease to Ukraine. I'm like, I missed the boat. I wanted the Trump that we all feared. How did we get here? Vote Republican to save America. Can't hold them accountable. Otherwise, you're helping the Democrats when you're being divisive, don't you know? Vote Republican to save America. Otherwise, you can't help. But then you can't hold them accountable because then you're being divisive, helping the Democrats win. On and on and on. We did that for 40 years. And then while we did that, they just did everything else. It is not a strategy that you may need Larry Hogan's 51st vote in the U.S. Senate to agree with you 4, 5, 6, maybe 10% of the time, max. It is complete and utter desperation. You're not Sun Tzu, you're Dorf on golf, okay? It's the stuff of, I suppose if you were the last man left on earth, we could mate. It's the stuff of that. It's the stuff of when Charlton Heston gets to the end of the beach. You blew it up. You damn morons blew it up. It's the stuff of that. It's not contemplative. It's not smart. There's literally no one else on earth to mate with, so I guess the species must go on. That's what it is. Now, is there a point in time if that's the case, you have to mate, otherwise the species doesn't go on, right? There is a certain reality to that statement, correct? Okay. But so in that moment, does maybe a transaction need to occur on the basis of nature, if nothing else? Okay. But can you actually rebuild the civilization you lost, or a new or better one, on that sort of foundation?
Probably not.
Nope. So yeah, for now, mate. We're out of humans. We're the only male and female left. Going to have to come together. But understand that that's not the basis for restoring this thing. You're going to have to learn some lessons for how you ended up here in the first place. And one of the main reasons we ended up here in the first place, we had to vote Republican to save America. Can't hold them accountable because then you're divisive, don't you know, and helping the Democrats win. Got to vote Republican to save America. Just keep doing that over and 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 over again. Then a whole industry emerges of people who make huge bank. If you stop and consider, if there's people in our business and industry, you're like, I don't understand what they're saying. I don't get what they think. Doesn't make any sense. Doesn't line up with facts. If you stop and understand that for most people, the number one reason for existence is to promote the message that Republicans have to get elected, everything else kind of makes sense from there. Okay? It makes sense why we have no funding on a state level, organization on these state levels to fight these abortion bills on the state level. Because we can't, Republicans have to win Congress this year. We got to win the presidency. We can't divert any funds from that. That's really what this is. That's the ultimate plumb line here. In the end. And that hasn't changed, whether it's Trump or Romney. It's just different people are running things. But the rubric itself is the same. And so while we're over here debating who will get the carcass, they're over there like conquistadors, man. They don't waste a minute debating the things internally that we do. Not a second. You know, their debate is what's the bigger risk? Running the same dementia patient we got elected the last time, or putting somebody else up that gives Republicans a whole new person to target? What's that? Their levels of debate are way different than ours. They don't have like stupid internecine crap that we do because they're a movement. And they're united by a vision and goals. We're just united against them. But that's not a vision and lacks goals. So therefore we have nothing other than vote Republican to save America. But you can't hold them accountable because that would be divisive how the Democrats win. That's the only thing that brings us together. We have nothing else that unites us corporately. Nothing else. And that's why that's all we ever do. And that's why we tend to lose, no matter who wins. All right, back here with Hour 2, live and on demand on Blaze TV, radio, and podcast. Steve Deace here with Todd Erzin, Aaron McIntyre, and all of you. We'll get to buy, sell, or hold here in a moment, brought to you by our friends over at the Nehemiah Institute. Founded in 1986, its primary work has been in providing a worldview assessment to youth in Christian homes associated with Christian schools, homeschool associations, church youth groups, etc. The assessment is called the Peers Test. It's the only professionally validated worldview assessment test. It's an acronym standing for politics, economics, education, religion, and social issues. Aaron, you took this test. How did you do? Are you going to go Oron, not Aaron, but Oron, tap the sign?
Yeah.
Is that what we're doing now?
For those of you
that?
listening, I'm pointing at my certificate. Where's your certificate? Oh,
How many questions on the test address smug self-promotion? This is outstanding.
I'm not being smug. I'm just pointing out what they're telling me is that I'm awesome.
I think I'm going to have to go to my buddy Dan Smithwick, who runs the Nehemiah Institute, and say that you need to come up with a humility section in your test. Okay, because there is humility is a big part of the biblical worldview as well. Then maybe have Aaron retake it. All right, but he did get, to his credit, on the politics, economics, education, religion, and social issues sections. He did score 100%.
Thank you.
Humility's got a little work. But he'll tell you he's pretty great at being humble, too, when he tries.
I'm the best.
Yeah, exactly. All right, they've done over 125,000 tests to high school age youth in over 1,000 Christian schools and other Christian organizations, and let's just say the results are tragic. All right. So if you want to do something about this, because like 90% of our Christian youth are scoring in the secular humanism category, less than 3% score in biblical theism, which is what Aaron got 100% in. This is arguably the single greatest problem facing the church in America today. If you want a resource to find out where you're at on this, all right, this can be used on almost any device. Get the Instant Peers Scorecard, plus instant access to high-quality position papers on the most frequently missed Peers items. This is just a great biblical worldview tool, guys. Access the full Peers test and their position papers for as low as $17.76 at worldviewcheckup.org. And if you use the promo code SD, my initials, SD101, promo code SD101, you can save even 10% on that. So just $17.76, save 10% with SD101. This is also great for small group studies as well. All right. Worldviewcheckup.org. Worldviewcheckup.org. See if your pastor will take it. See if your priest will take it. Especially see if your youth group, where hermeneutics goes to die in America today, see if your youth group leader will take it. All right, worldviewcheckup.org. Again, use the promo code SD101 at worldviewcheckup.org. And again, Aaron, what did you score? Remind us. I forgot.
100.
You got 100. Yeah. All right. He is awesome. You are awesome as well if you take advantage of the stevedeace.com inbox by emailing us, steve@stevedeace.com. You can like us on Facebook, MeWe and Gab. Follow me at Steve Deace Show on Twitter, Getter, Instagram, and TikTok. And if you like the podcast, thank you. We like you too. Please show how much you do like it by leaving us a 5-star review on whichever platform you like the podcast via. And then you can also hit subscribe, or in the case of iTunes, follow. And that way, every single time that we do a new show, it'll show up in your podcast feed every single time. Thank you to all of you that have done one or both of those things for us. We greatly appreciate it. Now it is time for buy, sell, or hold. Aaron has submissions from all of you. We'll get through as many of these as we can. The ones that remain, we will get to in the overtime today for Blaze TV subscribers at blazetv.com/Deace. That's where you can go to become one at a discount. blazetv.com/Deace. Again, that's blazetv.com/Deace. If you use the hold for any reason other than there isn't a reason, you've punked out, no good reason, then you have to vote for Lindsey Graham in the next South Carolina primary. I mean, that might be the most emasculating thing and demeaning thing I've come up with yet.
No, you got a pretty good track record at demeaning on this front, so I'm not so sure it's that cut and dry.
You have to vote for Lindsey Graham in the next Republican South Carolina Senate primary. That's your punishment. Aaron, go ahead.
We'll begin with a voice crying in the wilderness who says the current Trump iteration of what's left of America is significantly to the left on social and economic issues compared to the Democrat Party of 30 years ago.
I don't agree with this. I'll sell. I don't. I'll sell for two reasons. They clearly aren't to the left of where the Democratic Party was on cultural issues 30 years ago. I don't think that's accurate at all. On economic issues, I think you could make the argument they are, but I think to do that, you would kind of have to apply the traditional understanding of economics under the old political paradigm of what's conservative. And, it's conservative to promote, public-private partnerships. And you see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. I think you would have to make that under the old economic paradigm, much of which I probably still fundamentally agree with. But some very key points I just don't think are applicable anymore, given how reality on the ground has shifted. So I will sell on both accounts.
I understand where you're saying.
Can I make one more point really quick on the culture side? The other thing too is I can, more I think about it, I could see why you'd say that on the cultural side, but Democrats 30 years ago weren't asked from their own base to wrestle with the things Democrats today are. You see what I'm saying? If they were, we think Democrats 30 years ago would have held the line against their own base? I don't. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. I don't. So we just would have gotten to these places even quicker. I think typically, not always, but the reality is typically the more Trumpian you are in the Republican Party, the more socially conservative you are, actually. That's actually a pretty strong correlation. you can look at that and think that doesn't make much sense. Some of you will say, given Trump's personal history and, he's the whole Caitlyn Jenner, Bruce Jenner thing and, everything else. That's a separate debate and a worthwhile one, but it's largely true that the more Trumpian you are in the Republican Party, the more socially conservative, by our understanding of what that means today, you tend to be.
I understand why you come at it from this direction, particularly if you're talking about one of the greatest variables in an economic thinking in general, debt. I think then I would buy. And if you're just thinking along the lines of the national level, it's a lot easier to buy as well. But I do have to sell more broadly because we are thinking just beyond debt. And we are also thinking about we have to think about what's going on at the state level. And there are a lot of good and righteous priorities at those levels. I mean, what's going on at the national level is simply chaos, though. So I understand why you're driven to your positing this.
I mean, let's look at really quick what you said. You were kind of the lone, maybe dissenter. How about open? You were the lone person on the show in Trump's first run, open to the concept of using tariffs as a means of extracting some form of economic justice. Is that a good way of describing it?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. And see, I wasn't at the social compact is broken thing yet, so I'm still looking at it strictly from an economic theory perspective that really they are another form of tax. Understand there is no way a tariff will ever be applied. Let's just all be honest about that. There's never a way any tariff will ever be applied that the country you're applying it to will say, we'll go ahead and absorb all that cost voluntarily. They're not going to do that, right? Mm-hmm. They're going to try to pass that on to you. So it will be some form of a tax, okay? But are you willing to pay a toll in certain situations if it means that you'll have better roads? See what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Okay. If now, a lot of times do governments abuse those things and then the roads, like if you live in Michigan, for example, never get any better? Okay, sure. All right. But as a concept, are there moments when you'd be willing to pay a toll to get a better quality of road?
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's easier on your car, better gas mileage, you get to your place safer, better, faster, right? Okay. All right. Similarly, is there a moment now where I could contemplate I would absorb that, because the toll is another form of a what? Tax.
Yes.
Another way of saying it, okay? Is there a moment where I would be willing to absorb short-term a tax for a larger societal consequence that I think is more significant in the long run than just absorbing that tax that government we're targeting will pass on to me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Now I think, but it would require that moment for me to say I would be willing to violate my own conservative economic orthodoxy for that, because ultimately, this is again where you get into, is conservative economic, were we made for conservative economic and Austrian economic orthodoxy? Or was Austrian economic orthodoxy and supply side conservative economic orthodoxy made for us? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Okay. So what's more important, man or the Sabbath? Man is. So if we're at a moment where, like say, particularly China, or one country we are singularly indebted to and competitive with has such a relationship that this may be the only means by which we could get justice, and it will mean we'll have to absorb this cost internally for a while to get to that goal, I would be open to it. 5 years ago, I would not have been. That's kind of what I mean.
Yeah. Well, Trump ultimately, as a negotiating tactic and throwing a sabot into the system, was even more right than he thought, because ultimately I fundamentally believe this is one of the reasons the entire world was attacked with COVID.
I don't think you're crazy for positing that at all.
China was like, wait,
look at,
what game are you playing here?
We said at the time, look what was going on in China at the time of this virus. People forget their chief economic district, financial district, Hong Kong, was in a total uproar. Tiananmen Square almost level of protests were happening in Hong Kong. They're under assault from the Trump administration in an all-out trade war. And oh, by the way, right when Chinese hegemony is the most threatened it had been since Tiananmen Square, oh, look, here's a virus that requires shutting everything down. Yeah. It's a hella coincidence if that's what it is, at least. Yeah, we said that at the time. I think that's not a terrible take at all. Smart, actually.
Next up, we got a Wesley D's Twerking Twits talk show who says instead of a congressional age limit to retire, they're actually going to do an unconstitutional law to up the entry age into Congress to 55 years old.
I mean, I think I could see boomers doing this on their way out. Like, did you see the picture going around of Mick Jagger dancing and doing prep dancing for his tour?
And he's 80.
And he's 80. And we were supposed to celebrate that an 80-year-old wants to dance and do that kind of stuff. My first thought was, dude, where are your kids and grandkids? You're friggin' 80, dude. You have enough money, you haven't banged enough chicks, haven't heard enough applause. Imagine you're 80 years old and you're Mick Jagger, it's still not enough. Like, I'm 50. And like, if you gave me a choice, as much as I love doing this, do this or go over to Anna's house and hold Autumn. It's a pretty easy call. I can't even imagine how much easier the call will be when I get 3, 4, 5, 6 more of these. You know what I'm saying? I mean, dude, seriously. No, it's not a compliment that you can dance like that at 80. Who wants to? Who wants to do that? You're 80, dude. You know what I'm saying? I mean, where are your kids and grandkids? They're gonna put. He could wiggle his hips at 80. I guess we'll put that on Mick Jagger's tombstone when he dies at 82, 83, 84. I just no. Yeah, it's an
entire generation of people who internalize the music of their era.
Yes, and they just cannot move on.
Internalize the entire culture of their era.
Yeah. So I think that's far more likely I could see that. Yeah, had to have been to Woodstock or saw the movie in theaters in order to get elected. Yeah, I could see that.
I'm selling only because they won't need to do this. They've already accomplished it. De facto.
That's true. It's a redundancy now.
They don't need it. Biden is the president and he's running again, guys. Yeah. They don't need it.
Ashton DeGroot, our colleague here at the Blaze, has this. The U.S. is behind the Havana syndrome, not Russia. 60 Minutes, of course, had that feature story over the weekend claiming that a few whistleblowers from the Pentagon they interviewed saying that Russia has some sort of weapon that they're using and that's causing this neurological disease called Havana syndrome. But Ashton says the U.S. is actually behind this, not Russia. Buy, sell, or hold.
I didn't see this, and I haven't even heard of it yet, but it sounds like something I'd buy, so I will.
You want to talk about generational biases, man? I am bitterly clinging to my America bitch child of the 80s, man. I'm trying.
Let the past die.
Give me that idol.
Let the past die.
I need at least one idol. Can I at least have one? No. At least one. Like, can I jump on YouTube right now and just watch old clips of Reagan bombing Libya and just feel like the world is right again? Okay. No?
Nope, none. Smash them all.
Then I have to buy. All right, you ready to get put on another FBI watch list? Another one?
Another one?
Yeah.
How many of them do they have?
At least one more. Timothy Stevens says the Second Amendment has become a false hope, a security blanket for those who will never hold a rogue government accountable. We're at the scene in Braveheart where Wallace repeatedly tells his men to hold before picking up their weapons, but will never stop holding. Keeping does not mean or does not equal bearing.
I think I'll buy conceptually, but there are multiple. Again, I go back. You know, it's funny if I wrote rules for patriots now. Remember, my publisher said, "Are you going to endorse Scott Walker for president?" Because like all your examples are him. If I wrote rules for patriots now, like Chris Rufo would be like all my examples. Okay, but. He is showing us it doesn't have to. This doesn't. I will buy. What's his name again? Timothy. Timothy. I will buy what you're saying. Conceptually, you're correct. But this doesn't even have to be on the table, man. I mean, the amount of options available to us, if we were willing to tolerate a little suffering, a little bit more of family members who are already hating us more. Just a little bit, okay? Just if we DVR'd the Monday Night Football game and watched it late and went to the school board meeting that night instead and just kept away from our phone so we didn't see the score and we got home and just could watch the game in real. Do you know what I'm saying? Just the kind of suffering.
Do I know what you're saying?
The kind of suffering, in air quotes, that any previous generation of Christians would have thought was Club frickin' Med, okay?
More than that, they would have thought it was their damn duty, Steve.
Well, there's that too. Yeah. If we were willing to just do more of that, we wouldn't even have to, these things wouldn't even have to be contemplated and considered. And so while I agree and will buy what is submitted, I feel like the fact that this has to be considered is a failure on our own part, frankly.
I'll buy it, but add on. And maybe the more important point is, listen, from using it, this isn't even a theoretical. Look at with this squatter nonsense. I'll tell you, if a person comes into my home and I'm there, it doesn't, even if they're not a threat of violence, but we can see this happening now. We're just going to test the waters. We're going to walk in. I'm telling you right now, FBI, I'm shooting them. All right? They're in my house. They shouldn't be there. I'll ask them once to leave, and that's it. I'm shooting them. I'm probably going to get arrested like Daniel Penny. That's the problem. There's an entire system where the second you're addressing the cowardice side of things. I agree with you, but again, the social contract is broken. We have an entire system, executive, legislative, and judicial, who say like, Constitution? What Constitution? It's like you're speaking a foreign language. It's Pig Latin now.
Hey, before you get into the real estate market, I am seeing more signs in my neighborhood than I've seen the last couple of years combined. We're still at early 90s levels right now of people applying for new mortgages. So you can almost make an argument then there might be more of a buyer's market. Maybe you can get some good deals out there, but just do not test the Let's Go Brandon real estate market waters without a real estate agent you can trust. You'll find that agent most of the time from right here in your own audience, right here. They are a fan of the Blaze just like you. And this was a company started by Glenn Beck and his associates because they realized they kept running into agents who could not be trusted. So they wanted to do something about that. We're going to hook you up with the top sellers in your area, people who really know the ropes of the business, can help you with the best practices, get to the outcome at the end that you and your family need. So whether you need to just relocate in your own town or you need to move to a completely different town in a different part of the country, the name says it all. Go to realestateagentsitrust.com. Once again, head over to realestateagentsitrust.com.
Andy Stone is next. Number 1, America doesn't make it. Number 2, Christ is king, so it doesn't matter.
I could buy that. I could buy that. Go ahead.
We all believe on this show and have been for a long time, and Steve's been ahead of this curve longer than anybody, even when he was America bitches, but he was calling into question, ultimately what is the point of this all before a lot of people. Let's not be so cavalier that it's not something to mourn over, that the greatest country ever devised by free people, it doesn't matter when it dies on our watch. That's way too cynical. I'm not saying you're not a Christian by making this take. I understand, I think the sentiment, but it fundamentally, ultimately, is not a Christian take. Like, just
because Christ is king, we're not just going to give up on America.
I mean,
that's
then why are we here, the three of us doing this show? Why do we care that you listen? We don't want this to die on its watch. Look at how terrible the world has been throughout human history, and how it is right now. This place was a bright, shining light. It was it's a tragedy. It's one of the greatest tragedies in all of human history. If we let this thing die, it doesn't mean that salvation for us isn't nigh, but that's you're making a conflation, unfortunately, that we call for suffering, we don't call for undue suffering.
I mean, without this country, Man in the High Castle isn't fiction. But I took it the other way, which was because I think all three of us would also say, if the Lord is pulling the plug, anybody have a claim, want to argue it? Now, we don't know that, okay? So we don't want to create self-fulfilling prophecies. But if indeed that is what is, so we're going to fight to the end. I don't know how else to, I'm just wired that way anyway. Mm-hmm. But if it does, if number 1 is what happens, number 2 is ultimately what matters the most. But I get what you're saying too. I just kind of took it the other way as well. I saw something earlier along these lines that the state legislator in Oklahoma that's got everybody's panties in the wad. It's Dusty Devers, right? Mm-hmm. I saw him say this at a speech, quote, if we let culture set the terms, then culture is God and not our Lord. That's the quote. In other words, Christless conservatives are worried about whether the culture is on their side. Christian conservatives are worried about whether God is on their side. I'm just going to tell you guys right now, that is the most succinctly stated description of the driving force and premise of my entire career, is that statement right there. That's why I'm not moved by. I mean, I hope we get great ratings, but if I think what we're doing is right and the ratings plummet, then I guess I'll be doing something else for a living, because that right there perfectly explains. You know, when I was at Salem, another host and I got into a big argument in front of all the corporate VPs because he articulated the first position. He thought my job is to give the people what they want. I said, "Hey, are we the largest Christian media company in the hemisphere or not? Because if we are, then our job is to give people Christ." Yeah. Not necessarily whether they want it or not. Now, to do it in the best, most compelling, entertaining, captivating, interesting way we can, okay? But that's ultimately our job. And that's ultimately what I think my job is. And if you can't make a profitable show doing that, it's not personal. I'm not bitter. I'm not angry. It's all good. I'll just be doing something else.
I was, as much as I've panned my alma mater, University of Northwestern St. Paul up in the Twin Cities, there is one, he would be pretty much any, a actual Bible-believing young person who's gone through the broadcasting program there, he would probably be their favorite professor. The way that he taught broadcasting, and it's a difficult needle to thread in the context in which he taught it, but he did thread the needle. He said the way that broadcasting is taught, particularly broadcasting, I'm talking about the craft of broadcasting is taught by the world, is that in the solar system, the audience is the sun, and everybody else, you included, the host, is revolving around that sun. Mm-hmm. Okay? In the biblical worldview of broadcasting, the sun, S-O-N, is the sun, and you should be revolving around that. It's a difficult needle to thread. That's why it's a message that's not really taught that often, but that's the way that we're trying, at least I think we're trying to do it here. Mm-hmm. Moving on, we go to Nate. After 2024, Republicans will care more about community banking and small business growth than woke topics.
I will sell.
If that happens, the woke topics are going to care a lot about us.
Yeah, I get where you're going, but I don't want to go back and reset all this again, but.
I don't know if you're saying, and I've seen this elsewhere, that these things are just about to be played out or just about to turn that corner, as if you see like you're reading the fates or something. I absolutely disagree. Now, if we up our game, we can defeat them and we may move on to this thing. But I'm getting the impression that you're just saying these things are kind of played out.
Yeah. Or that we would come to some critical mass that we'd have to get more substantive and mature. Yeah. I don't agree with that.
We take it seriously. This is evil.
Yeah, I think actually the more grave things get, the more our audiences in mass are going to want brothers be flipping, and we're just one Republican majority away from saving everything again. This is human nature, okay? Human nature. Jesus approaches Jerusalem on one of his visits there. And he says, "Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how I have longed to gather you in as a hen gathers in her chicks, you who stone the prophets and kill those whom God has sent." That's more likely to be the outcome, brother, of the scenario that you're talking about. Give us more Barabbas content. Go yell Christ is King at Ben Shapiro some more. Do that for me. Because Ben pissed me off on the vaccine, and he was dead wrong about that. But you see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Not because I really care whether Christ is king, but I just want some kind of cheap, release. I want political only fans. I think actually the more dramatic things get, the more people are going to crave those releases actually, and that's human nature throughout history. When times get economic, red light districts grow. When economic times get bad, red light district grows. Let me try that again. Red light districts grow. Okay? Because why? I want to escape the real world. So, I get what you're saying, if I think that's what you're saying, but that sadly isn't human nature. Human nature is, Moses calls out all the tribes of Korah, because God wants a reckoning about who he really called to be his prophet. God opens up the earth and swallows all of the tribes of Korah that challenged Moses' God-given authority. The next morning, the Israelites do not go to Moses and say, "Dude, we're good. I got the message. I heard. We straight. I'm Team Moses. I was with you all the way, bruh. Let me show you. I got my Moses underoos, got my Moses thong, got my Moses socks, got my Moses sandals. I got a Moses tat on my back. All Moses, all the time. Is that what they did the next morning?
No.
No, the people of Israel the next morning went to Moses and said, that wasn't fair or right what happened to the people of Korah. That's who we are in our natural state. There is no way out other than revival. No plan, no way out. None. And the more serious the stakes get, the more we'll actually demand frivolity as a counter so we don't have to contemplate the seriousness of the situation.
Next up, we go to Brian Snyder. The great apostasy has started.
Far be it from us to argue that.
I wonder, could that happen? Yeah. Are there other eras where we could have said the same thing? Yes. But are there places elsewhere in the world where the word of God is flourishing and loved and embraced? Yep. Could just be watching the end of Western civilization. Nothing more, nothing, which I shouldn't say nothing less. That would be quite a thing.
Todd, Pope dies today. Who would you hope to take over? I think you've said this person.
Oh, many times. Cardinal Sarah from Nigeria, from Africa.
Yeah.
Just a blessed man and deeply serious.
And on the Protestant side, when we saw in the 90s the first major Protestant denomination to go what we would now call woke, the Episcopalians, when the traditionalists, when the conservatives, when they tried to save the denomination, where did they try going for new bishops on the Protestant side? Southern Hemisphere, outside of the West. Yeah, same thing.
And I think I said Nigeria. I meant Sudan. I'm pretty sure I meant, anyways.
Remember that clip in Matt Walsh's What's a Woman?
Yes.
Where he goes over to the African tribes and tries to explain to them what we're doing. And they look at us like,
moron.
Like we are the dumbest pox of rocks that have ever entered onto this mortal coil.
This is William F. Buckley's line about 50 random people from the phone book to lead us. He'd take that in a heartbeat over. 50 random tribal leaders from Africa these days. Absolutely.
It could just very well be you are watching Western civilization, which is what we called Christendom in this hemisphere. You are watching the moment where Christ says, go back and do the former things, or as Todd likes to say, go back and do the former things you once did. Otherwise, I will come to you and I will take away your lampstand. Could just be you're just watching the judgment of a culture.
When we continue with buy, sell, or hold in the overtime, we'll begin with a Mount Rushmore submission from a man who included the parenthetical information, quote, call me gay if you want. I don't care. Stick around.
What a segue.
Stick around for that in the overtime.
What a segue. Oh, gosh. Daniel is next. Stay tuned. Did you know Fast Growing Trees is the biggest online nursery in the U.S. with more than 10,000 different kinds of plants? Over 2 million happy customers here in the U.S. as well. They've got everything you could possibly want, like fruit trees, palm trees, evergreens, house plants, and so much more. Whatever you're interested in, they have it for you. We went through their online ordering process over the winter. And true to their word, they wait until the weather is warm enough, and it certainly isn't warm enough in Iowa right now for this stuff. But we are looking forward to getting some of our front porch stuff that Amy and I picked out to kind of spruce up the curb appeal of the house. So even if you don't have a large yard or a lot of space, you don't need a lot of yard or a lot of space. You can grow lemon, avocado, olive, or fig trees even inside your home, on top of a wide variety of house plants that are available. The experts at Fast Growing Trees curate thousands of plants so you can find the perfect fit for your specific climate, location, needs, situation. This spring, they have the best deals online, up to half off on select plants and other deals. And listeners to our show or viewers here at The Blaze, you get an additional 15% off your first purchase when you use the code DEACE at checkout. That's an additional 15% off at fastgrowingtrees.com using the code DEACE at checkout. Fastgrowingtrees.com. Use the code DEACE at checkout at fastgrowingtrees.com. Offer valid for a limited time. Terms and conditions may apply. Let's bring him on. Just got a note from somebody. I can't listen to more of your show anymore. It's too negative. So here's the prophet of woe and lamentation himself, Daniel Horowitz, my friend. How are you, brother?
Happy belated Easter from our mutual friend, Bruce Bruce Jenner.
Jeez. You know what, though? Since you brought up Bruce Jenner, his slurping his way into Trump's orbit aside, that does seem to be, we are doing much better on that issue from the outset in terms of attacking it and the premise of it. We're clearly more comfortable and prepared to attack this than, and I remember I was heavily involved in the gay marriage battles at the time, and it did kind of seem like unless you were like a hardcore put the fun in fundamentalist like me, Christian, or a hardcore, Orthodox Jew like you, no one else wanted to touch the issue for 20 years. Okay, on this one, there does seem to be, outside of the unique Jenner fetish that Trump has with him specifically, but it's kind of funny. A lot of other times he says the stuff on this issue we want him to say, but as a movement, this does seem to be one fight we are prepared to attack at the premise, and you and I should acknowledge that because we don't do that as a movement very often.
No, and that's why you have Bruce strategically there to ensure that our gains are limited, that we're not like Stonewall Jackson after the first Manassas, who was like, hey, there's no backstop here. We can go and take Washington. So they have to make sure that we only go so far as female sports, maybe the child castration, but nothing else. And, that's why it's so important that we don't cut ourselves short. But I think, Steve, that's important. Remember that Gallup poll that came out last year that showed we gained 18 points in 1 year among Republican voters just on the gay marriage issue, that the Overton window is moved back because I think people now understand what the agenda is. And, speaking of fast growing trees, those who plant in tears will reap with joy. And I said this on my show today. If you look across the landscape, it is a very comforting thought that basically you get commensurate with what you fight for. Mm-hmm. If you look at the issues, so last year I remember, even as late as a year ago, we were trying to push these bills banning Chinese land ownership, and almost everyone was shot down easily, like wouldn't even get a floor vote. And now they're almost all passing 1 year later. I mean, you got to start the issue 1 year. You fail, you're never going to succeed the first year. We certainly see that with the tranny stuff. We're even starting to see immigration enforcement. I brought this up last year that state enforcement is the only way around this. And, your governor is about to sign a bill that's at least, a first step for this. We have Idaho, we have Louisiana. So, again, I mean, you get what you fight for. What you don't fight for, you don't get. In other words, this inexorable slip into this demonic dystopia, it's not going to veer off the track on its own. We're going to have to interpose. If we don't do it, the roadmap is pretty clear where we're headed. So it's not some sort of black pill, like there's this deep state beyond our control, and they'll just, no, actually, if you fight for it, you kind of get what you fight for. One other thing I just add to that, Steve, not to hijack here, but I just saw a minute ago that Trump called it an airstrike in Nebraska, and the governor is now pushing for them to get rid of splitting their congressional districts. So, it's a certainty that Republicans win the state, but they nowadays, with the loss of the suburbs, they could lose the Omaha-based district, and potentially that one electoral vote can make the difference. Yeah. And it looks like they're gonna change that. So again, I mean, you use your top influencers to influence the big man, and you call in the airstrike, whether it's a primary, whether it's a piece of legislation, you tend to get what you want.
Let's talk about we get what we want. There are certain times and tactics that are called for despite the law of unintended consequences or collateral damage, because we're beyond it ain't no fun when the rabbit's got the gun now. Okay? Because the social compact that unites the two parties is that would cause you to rethink collateral damage, and do I want to set examples that'll be used against me later. When you have a social compact that is still, even if it's contested, it's still whole on some level. You put those things into consideration because there's a larger way of life at stake, right? Okay. But if the social compact is broken, then those things aren't part of your moral calculus anymore, because immediate action is required, right? If my neighbor hates my guts but stays in their yard, okay, and obeys the fence line, the social compact is intact. Okay, they decide they're now going to come into my home and threaten me or my children because they hate me. Well, now the social compact is broken. That has crossed a red line, and any unintended consequences, I'm not considering them because my primary concern is protecting me and my family, right? Okay. So the situation in Tennessee, we now have additional pro-life activists who are now, what was in your montage here? Another 6 of them, I want to say?
Just 4.
4 more, I'm sorry. 4 more are now being added to the original list of those being prosecuted under this FACE Act, which essentially says you can be convicted of praying. So using your God-given rights, especially if you're using them in defense of the God-given rights of others, all right, the right to life, okay? This is a clear violation of every norm, founding creed, doctrine, theory, okay, that led to the creation of this country. Are we at the point, and you have to be careful with this because, you know, you got Gavin Newsom over there in California watching, you got J.B. Pritzker in Illinois, they're watching, okay? But are we at the point now where this is so egregious that the governor of Tennessee, Bill Lee, as the head of the executive branch, which includes law enforcement, should have law enforcement that is under his power, given by the people, called in to station around the homes of these Tennessee citizens being threatened by the federal government, saying, we will interpose on their behalf. What you're doing here to our citizens is unjust. Understanding what that means moving forward, but does the moment, do you think, call for something like that?
So Steve, the moment called for it a while ago, and the longer we wait to walk, the longer it's going to take time to run. In other words, what you're talking about is a place where we ultimately need to get to, but you got to walk before you run. And again, this is how it starts off with it's for example, an immigration, state enforcement, and then eventually, ultimately, states need to straight up deport. But you got to do things in between and push that Overton window, start getting on the playing field. It's funny you mentioned that, Steve, because just 2 hours ago, I had our mutual friend, Steve Friend, the FBI whistleblower, on my show talking about a bill he just wrote in Tennessee, the first of its kind. It wasn't specifically addressing the FACE Act, but in general, the point he is making is that this is not a foolproof defense, because often the FBI will screw you on their own, but often they need to marshal in local law enforcement to get the intel and the logistics of the people there. So if they want to go after Catholics, they want to go after, organizations that are anti-federal government, whatever. So they work on JTTFs, these joint terrorism task forces, and they're calling us domestic terrorists. This is what they did with January 6th. So he has SB 2804 that he tried to get a hearing, and the committee blocked it. But we got on the map. Not a single Republican on committee would support it in judiciary. But what it did is it said that the local sheriff or state law enforcement officer, or chief law enforcement officer, so whether it's a commissioner or city police, county police, they get the final say over who joins these task forces. Okay, if you want to deputize one of my guys, I have to sign off on that, and therefore, me as the elected sheriff that's accountable to my people, I get to know what you're working on. Mm-hmm. So you can't just say, oh, terrorism, but really you mean the FACE Act, right? So this is the first step. It empowers local law enforcement. Of course, the members in there didn't want to hear from it, but this is the sort of stuff we need to be doing. We need also states to at least defend them, so you're not out on your own. It's very hard for them to get lawyers. They bankrupt them. It's a big problem. So where the attorney general would have an office within, under his stewardship, that when you are politically targeted, they have your back. Okay, that's something that the state is going to back you. Look, as far as collateral damage, it reminds me of the argument back 20 years ago, among other arguments, but this argument against torture, or so-called torture, of terrorists, was that, well, if you do it, let me tell you, you get caught by Al-Qaeda.
We can't upset the Arab streak. Yeah, I remember that.
Let me tell you, if Al-Qaeda, well, if you ever fall in the hands of them, you probably should have your cyanide still. They kind of maxed out in what they're going to do, and that's the thing. So it's really catching up with the left. So what they would do with ICE, we need to do back to the FBI. So ban the use of public detention facilities from accepting FBI prisoners within the state, banning government employees from participating in events, functions, the FBI Citizens Academy, the FBI National Academy, ban on FBI recruiting events at public colleges. That sounds familiar to what the left has done for years with the ROTC, ban on FBI events in public schools, different things like that. We're not even doing any of that. So this is where it's at. This is where it's at. We have already suffered the collateral damage. Let me just bring up a similar concept is with this whole business of putting restrictions on private businesses in pursuit of freedom to interpose against the federal government's influence on businesses. So with the vaccine mandates, they absolve them of liability, they market them, they promote them. Often they mandated them. And like with the masking, they mandated it. But then let's say the mandate came off and now businesses are going to do it on their own volition. But they're not really. They're doing it because the government induced it to begin with. If you have the marketplace or of the economy or politics tilted like this, if I come in with a status quo level playing field, you're preserving demonic hell. Now, you got to be careful and strategic with what you do and when you do it and how you do it. But ultimately, I don't see a way around what you're talking about. And that should be what we are all focused on. And based on the successes I've seen this legislative session, amidst all the disappointments, if we only had a modicum of a movement, organization, money, attention on this sort of stuff, we'd be a different country overnight.
Great stuff as always, my friend. Thank you.
See you later.
You bet. Gentlemen, we got about 3 minutes here. Your thoughts?
It's funny where he started. I always love his punchlines at the beginning, but talking about Bruce Jenner. I think that's such a fascinating take on how even under the best of circumstances, you were trying to do cup is half full, and instantly he's like, but let me show you the empty part, where this is the whole reason Jenner's there, because there's a governor on the accelerator, and in the modern conservative movement, you will never, ever, ever be able to put the pedal all the way to the metal. But that goes all the way to what we've been talking about this entire show, what you just tried to reiterate, why it is an act of mercy to whatever our side is to at least take it into the shed and give it a severe whooping. Otherwise, what's the point of this thing? We will need something entirely new. We may not have time for something entirely new, and that's often our frustration. But the whole Bruce Jenner thing is way bigger than the Bruce Jenner thing on every single issue.
I mean, correct. I mean, he's in many respects, he is to the tranny issue what the Beatles were to the British invasion. Okay, there were other great bands. Some people might even think, the Stones were even better. Who knows? Okay, but they were the avant-garde of the British invasion, right? Okay, he is of this issue. We had never contemplated mainstreaming any form of person in. I mean, RuPaul was known as a cross-dresser. That's just as a drag queen, okay? I mean, we had never thought about mainstreaming the idea of someone being transgendered on any celebrity societal level until him. I mean, he is he's the one making the crooked path for the issue. So there's a little bit more to him than just, he slurps Trump so gets in. He's one of the reasons we're sitting here on this issue. But yeah, I hear you.
How many shows have we done in the past about being unevenly yoked to fill in the blank? Usually it's the Republican Party, the leaders that we put it. I've come to the conclusion that yes, unevenly yoked. But what else would we do differently if we weren't behaving as if we enjoyed being unevenly yoked? That's basically the problem that we're in. It's not that we're stuck in neutral, we're stuck in quicksand. Just collectively as the not left America. I go back to this over and over again. People, like a lot of folks listening to the show, I would include myself in this, we're just left without real representation. Unless something fundamentally changes, like what Todd just said, taking whatever establishment there is into the woodshed. Establishment, whether it's politically or whether it's kind of culturally influential on the right, if we have any, it's not working. Fundamentally, it's just not working. So something dramatically and fundamentally has to change. And I think it will begin, though, unfortunately, with the people. Going back to what we were talking about yesterday with the Scott Rasmussen poll about who people believe Jesus is, something dramatic is going to have to change. And it's going to be hideous, but it's going to have to happen.
We're going to stick around, finish off buy, sell, or hold in the overtime for Blaze TV subscribers. You'll be able to watch that later today at blazetv.com/Deace. For the rest of you, we'll see you tomorrow, noon to 2 Eastern after Glenn Beck. Until then, Romans 8:28.